The name of tonight's session is Leading Change Without the Chaos, and we're absolutely delighted to have Liz Charles join us from the House of Commons, and we'll be introducing Liz in a few moments.
Great, thanks Garin. So Liz, Garin and I are really excited to be here with you this evening to talk about change. We'll hopefully keep a good pace and keep you interested and excited for the next hour and a half. So in the session tonight, we're going to try and do three things. So first off, we want to provoke you a bit, and we want to provoke and challenge your thinking about how you manage change and how you interact with change in your organisations. We want to give you some really practical tools and concepts that you can apply to your work, and we want to give you insights from experienced OD and change practitioners. So that's what we're trying to achieve this evening. Garin, over to you.
Yeah, so there's a framework for today's session. So we're looking at the subject of leading change without the chaos. So what we're going to do is we've done an exhaustive search of a review of the research, and there are basically four key mistakes that actually lead to chaos. So we're going to highlight them, and we're going to sort of take you through those consistent mistakes, and you'll probably notice them from your own experiences. We're going to look at what it looks like, why it happens, ways to approach it differently. We're going to give you some tools to apply, and we're also going to signpost you to further reading and resources as well.
As we said, there'll be a copy of the recording afterwards, and we'll make sure you get copies of the slides as well, so you can pay full attention to what we're saying. You'll have access to all the resources afterwards. So just a bit about us before we start. So Garin and I are both co-founders of Distinction, which is an organisation development and design consultancy service, and we work with leaders and leadership teams focusing on organisational effectiveness, on strategy, on decision making and team excellence. So I'm Dani, an organisation development consultant. So I was formerly director of people at Investors in People, and my background is more broadly in change and project management. So I've spent 20 years in the public, private and not-for-profit sectors working with organisations about how we make them more effective and how we deal with change.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, my name's Garin. By day, I'm an organisation development consultant, have been for the last 17 years or so. You may know me as being co-chair of CIPD Central London. So tonight I'm wearing my org development consultant hat. As I said, I've got a master's in organisation development, and I'm also chair of the CIPD London Organisation Development Group as well. So if any of you are potentially interested in a special interest group that takes the learning of OD even further, we run regular events as well. And we often see Liz there, don't we? We're very prolific on social media. So we have lots of videos on there, like what is organization development, what is organization design, lots of practical stuff. So again, please feel free to scan the QR code and subscribe to the channel. You get lots of hints and tips regularly. So we're really pleased that Liz is joining us this evening. Liz is an organization design and development consultant for probably an organization that we all know of from the House of Commons, and she's going to be sharing her experiences throughout the session. So we'll give you some input about the mistakes, and then she'll be relating it to her perspective and her experience as well. So Liz, are you happy just to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. And thanks for having me here. It's really exciting to be here and see all these people and talk about OD and change, which is something I'm really passionate about and really care about. Yeah, so as Garin said, I work as an organisation design and development consultant, but my interest is organisation development, really, and I have an org development orientation to change. So a lot of stuff I'm going to talk about today will be from that perspective. I've been at the House of Commons for 5 years, and I work with various groups at various levels. So it's not all at senior level. It's quite a disjointed organisation in a way. There's lots of good reasons for why that is. So I tend to work with parts of the organisation or on corporate projects. And before then, I worked in mainly public sector, health and education on OD and change. I started out in HR. So I have an HR background initially. I was a generalist when we used to call it that. And then moved into OD and change. And I'm also, over recent years, have been developing my interest in coaching and getting some coaching qualifications and doing lots of coaching, which of course relates a lot to how we support leaders and organisations in change as well.
Great. And we've really enjoyed, because to set up for today's session, we've had lots of conversations with Liz where she sort of shared her experience. So she's got some fascinating insights to share with you tonight, which I'm sure you get loads of value from as well. And maybe some stories she can't share this evening. Brilliant.
Okay, Thanks, Liz. So just about the structure for this evening's session. So we're going to kick off with a bit of a talk about the nature of change and just unpack some of the terminology that's often used. We're going to look at the contributors to chaotic change. So we're going to, as Gary said, we're going to unpack kind of the 4 key mistakes that organisations and people, change leaders make that can lead to change feeling chaotic. And we're going to interweave that with insights from the field. So we're going to bring in Liz and Garin and myself's experience. And then we're going to wrap up with a Q&A. So if you've got some questions, then pop them in chat as we go. We might be able to answer them as we go along. If not, we'll try and answer some of them at the end as much as we can. So we're also going to signpost you throughout to resources you can follow up on after the session. So you'll be able to do some follow-up reading and research and learning afterwards. So because this is a CIPD event, we thought we wanted just to direct you to the CIPD profession map. So the profession map sets out kind of the purpose, the values, the core knowledge, behaviours and specialist knowledge that people professionals need to make a positive impact. And it's a really good way of benchmarking where you are in relation to those standards. Our session today links to the core knowledge area of change. And specifically, we're going to cover, we're going to touch on things around managing change, how to engage and mobilise your people and stakeholders, and how to sustain change. Lovely. So we're going to kick off with a Zoom poll.
Yeah, so we want to see who's in the room. So we've got 2 questions for you if you'd like to just see the poll that's coming up. So we've got 1 question so we can just understand a little bit about who's in the room today. So what best describes your current role? Is it HR? Is it L&D? Is it internal OD? Is it you're an external OD consultants like us? Are you a student? And you're very welcome here if you are a student. We're always really well represented with students. Or is it other, something that we couldn't think of? And if so, then please put that in the chat. And then we've got a question for you for number 2, which is on a scale of 1 to 5, how well do you believe your organization manages change? Is it completely ineffective, largely not very effective, okay, but room for improvement, does a good job, or amazing, couldn't be better? And if anyone does amazing, could be better, we're very happy for you to lead the session this evening as well. So we could definitely learn from that. So lots of things coming through. We're going to close the poll off when we hit around about 75%. So 73% of you in the room tonight are from HR. You're very welcome, and you know, Liz will really have a great affinity with you in terms of her background and her journey to where she is. 8% is L&D, 10% is internal OD, and we've got 3% students, and others is 6%. And in terms of people where they are, and in terms of their organisation, so 60% say that their organisation is okay but has room for improvement around change. 25% largely not very effective. 11% does a good job, and 3% completely ineffective. And we have nobody that says amazing, could be better. And I have to say,
scared them off.
Oh, no one dared do it after I said that. Yeah, it's a change is challenging for all organizations, so it's not surprising that people are there as well. Excellent. So thank you so much for participating in that.
Okay, thanks, Garin. So we're going to kick off by busting our first myth, actually. So the change field's really littered with things that become fact or just the right way to do things. And these myths really influence how people perceive change and approach their own change initiatives. So that's that quote on the screen, that stat that 70% of change projects fail, is a really good example of this. So it's quoted all the time by sources that people regard as reputable, and it can set people up with a really negative perception about change processes, that, you know, it's going to be a waste of time, it's going to fail, and that's going to really influence how we feel about the work that we do and how people feel about the change initiatives they're part of. So actually, David Wilkinson, who runs the Oxford Review, who do a really amazing job of distilling kind of high quality research into really accessible and easy to understand briefings, he did a deep dive into this stat, and he's like a research geek. So he properly went back and kind of unpacked all of the kind of where it had been quoted and where they said it had been quoted. He went back, he found no evidence in the research to support this claim. It's just one of those stats that somebody said once, and it's just been replayed and perpetuated and quoted often. And, you know, in fact, Morehouse Consulting, who did this annual barometer of change report, they found that actually when you talk to leaders, they say that 62% of initiatives are actually considered to be successful. So it's kind of the opposite of that much quoted stat. So that's our first myth. We just wanted to get that out there because, you know, most presentations you attend about change will reference this at some point, but it's not true. There's no evidence to support that. And if you want to read and follow that QR code, you can read David Wilkinson's kind of research, and he's done a little video that takes you through how he's done that. So
he's a great resource, isn't he, to follow?
He's a fabulous resource.
If you're into evidence-based practice, he's a good resource.
Yeah. Okay. So we are going to talk a bit about the nature of change now. So change is everywhere. It's essentially what our organisation's about. Even business as usual is about change, whether it be turning raw materials into finished products or turning data into insights. And in our people and HR related roles, so much of what we do is about change, whether that be redesigning team structures or creating initiatives to promote a diverse and inclusive workforce, integrating new software or tools to streamline processes, building capability. It's all change. Okay. And continuous change isn't new either, so whether we like it or not, organisational change plays a really significant role in our lives. But what's different about change at the moment is it is happening more quickly and more unpredictably than never before. It wouldn't be a presentation without mentioning something like ChatGPT. You only need to look at that, the impact that's had in a very short amount of time, that sudden transformative disruption we're all experiencing. And I think the other thing about change at the moment is when the change we're making in our organisations is being done against this backdrop of significant change in people's, normal lives. So there's a really long list: Brexit, COVID-19, climate change, technology changes where we work with hybrid, demographic shifts, cost of living crisis, global uncertainty. So all of those are happening in the background. So it's worth bearing in mind that what might seem like a relatively small change we're making in the workplace is actually being layered on top of already significant change and disruption for people are experiencing outside of work. So it's worth bearing in mind that impacts how people cope and deal with kind of change in the workplace. So getting change right really matters. It's not just a nice to have. So it enhances productivity. If we can execute change really well, then we can boost individual and organisational productivity if we've got more streamlined processes. It contributes to sustainable organisational success because change is what helps our organisations adapt to external conditions and expectations. And it also supports the well-being and engagement of our people. If we manage change well and people have got that sense of agency and involvement in those changes, then that's a really important component of well-being. People having autonomy over the work that they do and the work environment is a really important component of well-being. Okay, so we're now going to look at some of the terminology around change before we dive in. So we see various things talked about. So the first type of change we want to talk about is planned and emergent. So planned change is deliberate. It's a product of conscious reasoning and action. It tends to be linear and quite structured and often top down. Emergent change is more unpredictable. It's more spontaneous and often without pre-planned intention. So it tends to be more open, free-flowing, and can be initiated from anywhere in organizations or outside. The other types of change we talk about are proactive and reactive change. So proactive change is when we're making changes in our organisation in anticipation of future trends or events that are happening. Reactive is when something happens outside and we just have to kind of trigger change to deal with that. We've then got strategic and operational change. So strategic change involves large-scale transformations like mergers or acquisitions, things that affect how the organisation operates and is structured. On the other hand, you've got operational change, which relates to day-to-day activities. That might be improving processes or operations. And then lastly, the other definitions we want to talk about are transformation and incremental change. So you often find transformation and change used interchangeably, but for us there's a distinct difference. Transformation has something about scale, so it has to have enterprise-wide implications. It's not just about optimizing a process or rolling out a small change process, it's more about reinvention. Incremental changes tend to build on what's already there, so they've got more of a flavour of continuous improvement. In reality, most organisation change is a mix of all of those. It's got elements of all of those. It's a case of and not or. And managers and leaders just have to learn how to manage the tensions between those different types of change. Okay. So why does change feel chaotic? It does. I mean, that's often what we hear when we're talking to organisations and change leaders. They say it just feels like chaos. So we're going to unpack a little bit about why that happens. But before we do that, we just want to get your thoughts first with a bit of a chatterful.
So when we do Chatterful, what we do is we ask you a question, and then once you've typed it, we go 1, 2, 3, and then everyone press enter at the same time, and then we get everybody's responses. So the question is, in your experience, what is the biggest obstacle to implementing change effectively in your organization? Okay, so just take a couple of moments just to write it down. So think about your own organization. If you're a student, maybe think about your university that you're at the moment. Go, okay, press it now, and then we'll see everyone's responses as they come in. Okay, great. Or not knowing where to start, lack of information, communication, lack of leadership capability.
The people.
Yes, resistance. Yeah, and we're gonna talk about that. Fear of honest conversations, people backtracking on key decisions. Yeah, some really good inputs there as well. We've got some good talent in the room this evening, Dan. We're going to have some good conversations, aren't we?
We are, absolutely.
Brilliant. And feel free to pick up on the chat as we go, guys. If there's got any observations or feedback, or if you agree, then please like people's different comments as well.
Okay, so we're going to kick off with mistake number 1, and we're calling this one creating the illusion of certainty. So the first mistake that contributes to change feeling chaotic is what we're calling creating the illusion of certainty. So we're wired as humans to like things that are easily explained, and this is no different when it comes to change. We find comfort in simplicity. We like that things are certain and predictable. So when we're leading change, it's really crucial to be mindful of this instinct. So we often fall into the trap of creating the illusion of certainty even when it's not present, or in other words, we oversimplify change, which isn't always as straightforward as we might want it to be. So what does that look like in practice? One example is how we plan for change and our estimates of the time it takes for change to fully embed. So the Centre for Creative Leadership did some research and found that a change that takes 12 weeks to plan and implement typically takes 100 to 120 weeks to integrate and properly embed in an organisation. And actually, it can be double that if it's been poorly planned. So how long do you think most organisations allow in reality for a change programme of this size to integrate and embed?
Ooh, okay, so jump in the chat, everyone, if you want to just put your answers in there. So a change that takes 12 weeks to plan and implement typically takes 100 to 120 weeks. So we've got 3 months, 2 weeks, brilliant. Lots of different responses. 6 months, excellent. Less than 12 months, 3 to 6. Thank you, Neve, 3 to 6 months. So lots of good responses coming in. Dani, do you want to just tell people what the actual answer is?
Yeah, so the answer is 26 weeks. So less than a quarter of the time it's really going to take. So there's that real assumption that it's going to, this is clear, we can plan this, it's going to take 26 weeks to embed, and actually it could be 100 to 120 weeks. So you can see if somebody's gone into a change program with that assumption, you get to week 27 and it's not embedded, that's when you can see things starting to unravel. Okay, so the other way that this illusion of certainty shows up is in assumptions about that change is linear and that it can be planned out in detail. That projects and Gantt charts can accurately reflect the way change process will unfold, or that a change model like Kotter's 8 steps, that's on the screen now, can tell us how to manage the change process step by step. These practices and models assume that organisations are stable and that an organisation can move from where it is now to where it wants to be just by following a step-by-step guide. In reality, things are messier and more uncertain. People are human, they're unpredictable, so there's that degree of uncertainty about how people are going to react. And we know that people aren't necessarily going to behave how we'd like them to. And that, they assume that the internal and external context we're working with are, stable, when actually in reality, they're evolving and changing increasingly quickly. So whilst project plans and change models have got their uses and their merits, it's important not to accept them as the absolute truth. There's something really seductive, I think, about seeing a whole change plan mapped out. You've got, your Gantt charts, and it all looks lovely and ordered. Makes us feel like we've got everything under control. We know exactly how things are going to turn out. But thinking we can simplify the kind of big complex changes and manage them like this can actually end up leading to chaos when our neat and tidy plans kind of start to fall apart and we haven't got backup plans or strategies to roll out. Instead, things get messy. We end up with misalignment, we end up with confusion and frustration, and that's the perfect recipe for chaos. So we've painted quite a bleak picture. So, how can we work differently to avoid that? And we've got 3 strategies we want to talk to you about now. And the first one is kind of what we call clocks or clouds, and we'll explain that shortly. But that's about matching the change approach to the type of problem. So Karl Popper, who's a philosopher of science, he introduced the concepts of clocks and clouds to describe scientific phenomena, and they're really good metaphors for thinking about change. So clocks are changes that are orderly, predictable and structured, just like how a clock works. The movement of each part is precise and predictable and sequenced. So that might be a change like implementing a payroll system or an off-the-shelf HR information system, where the steps, you've got a better chance of clearly defining the steps. You kind of know the process needs to be gone through. It's been, people have been through it before. You can have a clear start point and an end point and well-defined stages along the way. And that's where plan change with, project plans and Gantt charts can actually work really well. Clouds, on the other hand, are systems or change that are more complex and less predictable. So in the same way that there's loads of variables that influence the exact form that a cloud's going to take in the sky, there's many variables that are going to influence cloud type changes. So a cloud type change might be something like culture change in an organization. You can't really predict the outcomes because there's so many individuals involved and so many variables, and human behavior is just complex. Change is less predictable, so you have to be more flexible and adaptable and adaptive. If you adopt an entirely planned approach to a change that's a cloud change, that's likely to lead to chaos. So when we're thinking about change, we can ask ourselves, are we dealing with a cloud problem or a clock problem? And that will help us determine the right approach to take. And you need different strategies for the two different types of changes. So we'd love to get your thoughts in chat. Can you think of any examples of cloud type changes that you're seeing in your organizations currently? I mean, ones we thought about were things like hybrid or leadership development programs or diversity and inclusion work.
So yeah, so in the chat, if you just want to add maybe things that you see in your organization that rather than being the sort of typical logical kind of change things that were things that where it's a little bit more uncertain. So feel free to add your thoughts in the chat about what that might be.
Okay, so while you're doing that, we're going to move on to strategy number 2. So another way of working with change uncertainty, rather than creating a false sense of certainty, is to embrace an experimental mindset. So this can really significantly enhance our ability to handle kind of change uncertainty and increase our organization's change agility. So in this approach, failing fast isn't seen as a setback, it's seen as a strategic way of learning and a step towards finding the right solution. And our change initiatives become experiments. If one approach doesn't deliver what we need, then we learn, we modify, and we carry on. So we can continually adapt how we're working. So in practice, that looks something like this. So you start off by creating a hypothesis. So this is the change we want to make, and we make an educated guess about what's going to happen. So for instance, that might be, a flexible work policy is going to boost productivities. It's going to allow employees to work when and where they're most effective. Then you experiment. So you test that hypothesis. You run a small scale experiment to test whether you've got it right. And just, for example, you might let one department or one team try the flexible work policy. Then you gather data and evidence during and after the test. You might surveys, you might collect productivity stats or personal stories. Just try and make sure your data collection is fairly robust. Then you learn from your results. Look at your data. Does it back up what you thought would happen? If it does, then that's great. That gives you kind of the evidence to go forward and take action. If not, then maybe you need to go back to the beginning and kind of reframe your hypothesis or tweak it or come up with a new one and start the experimentation process again. But that can be a really good way of quickly working in change uncertainty. You're not putting things, solid things in place. You're trying and learning, trial and error. Okay. So our last strategy for working with change uncertainty is a metaphor. Actually, so in the midst of organisational change, particularly when it's uncertain, guiding people effectively can be one of the real challenges. So without that guidance, people can feel lost and change can feel quite chaotic. And that's why we find comfort in those detailed project plans and other things that give us that illusion of clarity. But there's an alternative. So I heard John Amici, who's a fabulous business psychologist, he used this metaphor and it's stuck with me. It's just a really great way to help us think about how we guide people through change uncertainty. And that metaphor is the idea of a lighthouse keeper with a torch. So the lighthouse represents the kind of big picture goals of the change. It's there and it shines across a wide area, providing a constant reference point for everybody. And even in tough times or stormy seas, the lighthouse stays steady and it reminds everybody of the direction they need to go. So as change leaders, we need to share these lighthouse visions with everybody in the organisation so everybody knows the long-term direction and they can work towards it, no matter how uncertain things are. The torch, on the other hand, lights up the next few steps. It shows the kind of short-term plans, the immediate actions, and the interim goals that lead everybody towards that long-term vision. And as leaders, we use that torch to explain the immediate tasks and roles that we want team members to engage in to contribute to the change. So with both the lighthouse and the torch, people get the big picture vision and the immediate guidance they need to navigate the change effectively. And what you don't have to do, you don't have to have fully formed medium-term plans to fill in the gap between now and the future. As long as the immediate next few steps are illuminated, people can take action and start moving towards it. Okay, so that was our first mistake, and that was our first 3 strategies. So the mistake number 1 is creating the illusion of certainty. Strategy 1 was matching the change approach to the type of problem. Strategy 2 was experimenting, and strategy 3 was illuminating the path with the torch and lighthouse metaphor. And there's some resources you can follow up that are really good on this.
Great. So Liz, you've been nodding your head at various times along the way. for everyone who's listening, feel free to, you've really engaged in the chat really well. We're loving your ideas that come in, keep them coming. And I guess, Liz, we've got a question for you. So what advice would you give to people to ensure they align their approach to the right type of problem, you know, whether it's a clock problem or whether it's a cloud problem during change initiatives?
Thank you. Yeah, and I was just smiling there. It's just an aside because that lighthouse is really powerful for me, because I worked on a change with a group in an organisation and we called ourselves the Lighthouse, and we talked about the torch and the lighthouse. So it just reminded me of some really good stuff I've done before. Advice I would give, I think I saw a comment in the chat a while back saying most cloud problems are treated as clock problems. So I suppose when I see this question, that's what I'm thinking about, that I tend to work with clouds. And people come along thinking that they're clocks, and so the answer that it says to me is, well, how do you get them to see it as something other than a clock, when, as we've said, they're really attached to this idea of certainty. They want to make things clear and better. They want to do it all in 26 weeks and all of that. And I'm an internal consultant. There'll be lots of people here who are in the same boat, that then they come to you and they say, oh, you know, just help us do this in this time, and you've got to find a way of slowing them down and putting the brakes on while retaining some credibility, so that they keep you involved and ask you again and not think you're a right pain in the whatever and just a blocker. And so strategies that I've used is, there's something to me about using the language of the clock. So the language of plan change, the language that it can all be sorted out, but knowing that underneath all of that, you're working with something quite emergent and different from that, and that, you know, surprises and chaos may ensue, rather than telling them up front, because I think when you tell people, they just switch off, don't they? And so my other strategy is thinking, well, questions are the answer, is something that I use a lot, and I know there's a couple of people on the call that have heard me say that before. So I would tend to ask questions, and I might adopt a variety of lenses. So in OD, we work with lenses quite a lot to help people get another perspective and to figure it out for themselves. So a coaching approach, questions, lenses. And so if somebody's coming with what they see as a clock problem, then that's a rational problem. It's a rational lens. And you can work that through with them, start where they are. And then I might ask them some questions around emotions, feelings. What about the people impacted? What will this mean for them? And then they'll start realizing, okay, there's a bit more to this. And then I might put on a political lens and talk about, what does it mean for power politics in the, you know, small p politics, not the House of Commons type politics. What does it mean for the way resources and control and so on? What differences are there going to be there? And then helping people to realize that it's a different sort of problem, but then packing some of those conversations and experiments in underneath the language of the clock, of the plan change. And the other thing, and this is going to be my answer to a lot of stuff, is that there's a thing we say in OD about get the system in the room, work with groups, and I work with groups such a lot. I think there's such a lot of power in bringing groups together. So in organisations, there's this pressure, I think, to hold on to this idea that we can plan change, we can give certainty and so on. And it's really hard for people to push back against that and resist that. It's really hard because they're under pressure to deliver. It's in their objectives, they're being measured on it, or you know, in some organisations, of course, it's going to be financially challenging and all of that. But when you create a safe space in a group for people to talk about some of this stuff, then it starts to become normal and okay to say these things. And then the group develops its own sense of belonging and identity and can gather around these things and make them happen. So I think channeling stuff through groups and asking questions, that would be my main answer to that question.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's really powerful, isn't it? Because I guess with the power of questions, you're not telling them and if you did tell them, they're likely to reject it, but the questioning actually makes them sort of think for themselves and think through the implications as well. And I love what you're saying in terms of the use of lenses too. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Liz. Really valuable contribution. So you will have an opportunity to ask Liz questions at the end. So feel free, if you've got any questions in terms of what Liz has just shared there, to put it at the end of the session, or keep them coming in the chat. Some great examples there of experimentation. I think Sauda was just talking about Elon Musk's approach to building starships was a good sign of experimentation at scale, I think. So let's move on to mistake number 2. And this is something that is really interesting. It's not involving people early and often. So let's just go into that a little bit. Dani's used a slide with jelly babies on here. So this is basically research from 2004 found that 1/3 of senior managers acknowledge that the people elements are ignored in their change program. So you'd hope in 20 years or so that's actually improved, but it's something that we often get called in after the fact, once a change program has been launched, and we will often get called in to try and sort of help rectify it. And we do see that the people element is missed out quite a lot. And then people aren't involved early enough. And this often stems from 2 different sources. There's a fear that it will slow things down if we involve everyone, and a fear that if you get too many different perspectives, it will just complicate things, and it can lead to unpredictable outcomes. So I guess let's just unpack a couple of those things in more detail. So fear 1, we don't have time to involve people. Yeah, so many managers will argue with you that they believe they don't have enough time to involve people, and it really is a misunderstanding, and it depends on how you measure time as well. So it may seem easier in the earliest stages to skip early engagement, but this often leads to more time being spent down the line in the process, actually working on trying to get people on board. So if you involve people from the start, it's really crucial for successful change. Without it, people we'll use the word resist in speech bubbles here. We'll talk about resistance a little bit later, but they will resist the change. They'll slow down its adoption, and the initiative might even fail. So if you actually involve people, what you do is you then start to get people's know-how and insights, and you start to reveal maybe problems or insights that you hadn't maybe assumed would be there. And you can actually start to address these things proactively, not reactively. Your employees know your day-to-day operations, how the BAU works, the challenges, the workarounds. So if you involve them early, what it does actually uses their knowledge to your advantage. But if you make changes too quickly without involving people, it really can be quite stressful for people within an organization to keep up those constant changes. So it really is a choice that you have to make. Involve people early, and it will spend more time up front investing, but it will save you time further down the line, or do it quickly and then sort of repent at leisure. So the next fear is involving people will complicate things. So managers are often concerned that if you involve too many different people, it complicates things. And so this is often linked to a perceived risk of unpredictability, a concern that the change process might spiral out of control. And this often, is born out of a traditional top-down view of leadership and change. So the leader decides what's to be done and then directs the team to execute it. And as we said, on the surface, this seems simpler and more straightforward. However, what it means is it often overlooks the value of diverse perspectives and the active participation and what that brings. So as I said, it often leads to great resistance. People are less enthusiastic about changes that they haven't had a part in shaping, and so you really need it to harness their sort of collective intelligence, insights, and commitment. Yet it does actually add more complexity. The more divergence of ideas you have, the harder you have to work to actually get to consent. But what it does is, by having those diverse opinions, actually improves the quality and the acceptance of your decisions as well. So we're just going to run a quick Zoom poll, and just to understand where you guys sit on this spectrum. So we're just going to launch this for you. So the next poll we're just going to launch is, in your organization, what's the main reason people aren't involved early in the process of organization change? So is it 1, fear it will lead to unpredictable outcomes, it'll take too much time, it undermines the role of the leader, not sure how to involve them effectively, or our people would say they are involved. Actually, we do it just about right. So we'll just give everyone a chance to put their answers and their perspectives in there. So 50% of you say it's because people are just not sure how to involve them effectively. 11% it undermines the role of the leader, and 11% actually our people would say they are involved. 14% is a fear it will lead to unpredictable outcomes, and 14% also it will take too much time. So a good split there with people as well. Just stop sharing. So we've sort of laid it out there, but how can we work differently? What are the alternatives to that? So I guess the first thing is to bring the idea of bringing a brick, not a cathedral. Many managers are brilliant problem solvers. That's what gets them promoted. So we use the sort of the idea of a bring a brick, not a cathedral. So with that concept, as it may often seem easier to develop the solution or the change idea by yourself or with just a small group. And so if you present your change initiative, your idea as a fully formed fixed plan or cathedral, what it does is it often, overwhelms others and maybe limits their input. It gives the impressions that all decisions are final and their role is merely to execute it. However, if you can sort of share it at the draft stage, so you bring a brick, what it does is it actually open the doors to actually get people's contributions and their ideas and their bricks. And this really encourages ownership and engagement, but it means letting go of control, which can be quite scary for some managers. But as we said, a lot of the changes are actually cloud problems. So it actually gives you flexibility and it allows your plan to evolve based on their collective input. So it's better to think of yourself and your change team as an architect. So you still have to provide guidelines, set boundaries, and guide the process to keep it aligned with the organization's goals. But you are guiding that process, but you have to give people some space. And it's important to be transparent about the influence people actually do have, so how much they can actually shape the change. And people do contribute and maybe you don't pick up on their ideas, and making sure that you just explain the rationale why their idea wasn't taken on board, and just really show appreciation for everyone's contributions too. Second thing to really involve people is to establish spaces for dialogue, and Liz touched on this beautifully when she was talking about the importance of big group interventions. Those spaces really matter for dialogue, and so if you can actually establish like an environment that encourages people to contribute, then that can really make a big difference. So instead of limiting it to just a select few, what it does, you get a good range of different opinions in there. But you need to let people to share their feelings about the proposed changes. And this can be done through facilitated sessions or just regular meetings during the process. And try to include a really good range of people, potentially the whole system, and not just senior representatives. Otherwise, some views will be exaggerated and some views will be downplayed. And a trap that many leaders fall into is before they announce the change, they've sat with the problem for a long time. And all of a sudden, when they do announce to the organization, say in a town hall or whatever, it just gives people a very brief amount of time to consume the problem, to understand the issue, what's going to be, and to then decide whether to jump on board or not. So it's about letting people have time to consume the change, just let it soak in, and then ask the questions that they need as well. So just going to share a tool. So if you do want to sort of engage with your people and understand how they feel in relation to the change that you're announcing, a nice tool is a spectrum support. So often it's like a binary thing. So do you agree with this change or do you not? And what that does, that binary question leads to really limited conversations. So the spectrum support, what it does is it gives a whole new palette of different places where people can say where they are. So it can be that, yeah, I support it, but I've got some concerns. So you can then work with those and isolate those concerns and work on it. Or if people are against it, maybe it's just they have some concerns that you need to work on as well. So this is a really great tool that Dani and I use very regularly. Another thing that you could do is inclusive facilitation. And these are some of the tools probably that Liz uses. And Liz, feel free to add some of your tools that you would use or approaches. These are all tried and tested ways of large group interventions. So some of you may recognize Open Space and World Cafe. We're big fans of things like Spiral Journal to invite people in to this. Conversation Cafe is a really good way of showing there's a share of voice and it's not just the usual suspects sharing their opinion too. So those are the three elements of mistake 2. So bring a brick, not a cathedral, establish spaces for dialogue, and inclusive facilitation as well. We've got some resources there. So liberating structures is a brilliant methodology for finding ways of facilitating. So we recommend you go there. And if you scan the QR code, we'll share the question burst exercise with you too.
So Liz, I'm sure you could probably talk for hours on this. So we're really interested, kind of what are the inclusive practices you found to be most effective when you're involved in helping manage change?
I mean, it does lend itself, doesn't it, really, to what I was saying before about setting up groups and bringing people in. So I've worked on a few change programs where we have identified or brought, invited people to get involved by becoming, and I know lots of organizations do this, change champions, or some kind of where they're going to take some kind of role in their own team or in their own local area, but also be part of a central group that's helping channel information and some of the changes that are happening, if it's behavior and culture, for example, that they become role models for it. So running those as a cohesive group, but giving them some freedom and some activities to do, I think is really important. So this idea, you mentioned it earlier about autonomy and freedom and growth and so on. So something else I've found really effective is to include developmental opportunities in the opportunities for involvement. In an example I can think of where with a business transformation where we had some change champions involved, part of setting them up as a group was skilling them up with some facilitation skills, feedback skills and so on, so to develop their own confidence in representing what we were trying to do, but also bringing in data and information from groups that then they could feed in. And another particular thing I can think of is where we put on a specific, this was about service redesign change in a health setting, bringing groups of people, groups of managers together who didn't work with one another before, and offering them a developmental program to help them get their head around service change and the role that they could play in that as managers. But also a product of that program was them developing the proposal. So it's a developmental stretch for them, but also it meant they were instigating change in going out and doing those activities too. And that was a really powerful intervention.
Well, the idea of creating those developmental opportunities alongside, because you do often get people, I don't want to be involved, I'm not sure I've been very good at it, or I don't know how to do it, or so building confidence is really great.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah, thank you. The other thing was, we were talking before about clocks and clouds and using the language of planned change. And again, like you were saying, leaders are scared to get all these people involved because they think it will be really chaotic. And like you were saying, all the reasons you were saying before, it's going to be really challenging. And I may be afraid because if I'm in the room as a leader, I've just seen the mention of word clouds. We used word clouds at a town hall recently, which was quite a different thing to do in the context I'm in, but I recognise other people would do that. But again, there's a bit of a, because what are they going to put in these word clouds, and will I be able to handle it as a leader? So again, there's some developmental support for leaders in that as well, and that's where I think coaching can really play an important role. But if you look at your change program, and it's normally got those steps in, and that's the language you need to speak, is then we're looking for what are the opportunities. There's normally some products that are going to be developed, like maybe it's a vision statement, maybe it's a culture and behavior framework, maybe it's a customer commitment statement or something like that, and finding pockets of things that are going to be produced and enabling, getting change champions to facilitate some work on that, and then bringing change champions and leaders together to facilitate that, and that's developmental too.
Amazing. Those really interesting discussions there. On to mistake 3 now. So this is misdiagnosing resistance to change. So we're going to be a bit controversial here.
This has come up a lot so far, hasn't it? The resistance to change. So let's tackle that, shall we?
So this is a great quote from Kurt Lewin, who's kind of a founding father of OD. So he says, if you truly want to understand something, try and change it. So it's often only once we start to initiate change in an organisation that we truly understand the complexities of kind of the system we're working with and in. And if you read any article or book or about change or go to a webinar, then resistance to change is going to be a phrase that crops up repeatedly. So how much of this sounds familiar? So resistance is unwelcome and obstructive. It's something we need to overcome, and it's something we need to silence. We can't have resistance. We build up this story about people. We label people as resistant to change. We say, they don't like change, or they're just stuck in old habits. They're displaying dysfunctional behaviours or personality traits. They're trying to avoid the unknown, or, they don't like the loss of control. They've just got this lack of psychological resilience. So these are things we've heard time and time again when we talk, about people's reactions to change, and this is how people are portrayed. We've also have a tendency as change leaders to sometimes create tribes of heroes and villains in relation to change. So you've got the tribe of heroes, they're the change agents or the change leaders, or even those change recipients who are really enthusiastic and proactive about change, and they're happily going along with everything that's being suggested. Then you end up with a tribe of villains. So they're often the change kind of recipients that are labelled as resistant. So they're the ones who are expressing reservations, or they're seen as difficult. And we actually call this the myth of resistance to change. There's actually a really good research-based paper we'll signpost you to if you want to learn more about this, but it's a paper well worth looking at. So What might we lose by buying into this idea that there is a resistance to change? So it's really tempting to buy into that myth and approach change from the perspective of we shall overcome, we'll suppress the resistance, we'll push our change through, we'll make it happen. And that puts us into them and us mode and kind of creates almost like a battlefield and kind of the ensuing chaos. If we buy into that myth that resistance to change is something we need to clamp down on, then it actually shuts down our curiosity. We're going to talk about that a bit more, but actually if you've got an absence of resistance to change, or nobody talking about, well, I'm not sure this is a good idea, you might have a lack of organisational health or a lack of psychological safety, or even a lack of diversity of thought. And those change heroes we talked, what about the ones cheerleading the change? What if they're just playing lip service to the change because they want to be labelled as a change hero, and they're not telling you the concerns they've really got or the challenges that you might face? So that's the scene that we're setting. So how can we work differently? Well, first up, we'd encourage people to kind of reframe how they view resistance and not buy into the myth that it's something that needs to be kind of silenced. So we'd have kind of encourage you to avoid getting into a tug of war where you have two tribes, the resistors and the non-resistors, and you're trying to kind of work out who's gonna succeed. See resistance to change as data. It's something to be understood rather than silenced. See it as a chance to engage people in the service of a better plan. So people who are labelled as resistant may actually have some really important insights that we're going to miss if we label them as resistant and just try to keep them quiet. Fear is a really natural and healthy reaction to change, and we shouldn't mistake questions or people weighing up risks as kind of resistance. Those dissenting voices might have a really useful source of insight about kind of operational realities of the change we're trying to implement. People need a space to be able to voice those and see that the concerns are being listened to. We can reframe resistance as an opportunity to pick up on faulty assumptions, discover potential improvements, and it's a really good opportunity to show that we value and respect our people by listening to them and creating a sense of agency and empowerment. Okay, so it was interesting we talked about this idea of bombarding people and trying to persuade people. This book's really good by Adam Grant. It's all about the importance of being open to new perspectives and the power of not knowing. And in it, he talks about the measles vaccination debate and highlights that research has shown that if you use data and rational arguments to try and persuade people to change deeply held beliefs, it doesn't work. The harder you push, the more entrenched their views get. Even when you bring in policy or legislation or sanctions, that doesn't shift their fundamental beliefs. At best you might get compliance, but they're not going to change what they think deep down. So what does work, and it goes back to what Liz was saying, give people a space to talk, to ask questions, to express their thoughts, to say out loud what they're thinking. Use really good coaching questions to get them to reflect on what they're saying, be open to hearing their perspective, learn from them, and in that way you create this more open and thoughtful dialogue, and that can lead to greater shared understanding, and people are more likely to change their mind. Adam Grant says that the person most likely to persuade you to change your mind is actually you, not somebody else. It's you that's going to change your mind. Quick tool here that's really good for getting beneath the surface. So if you've got perceived resistance, you can think about it from these 4 lenses. So is it a clarity issue? Do people just not know what's expected of them? Is it a competency thing? Do they not have the skills or the knowledge to change? Motivation, do they just not see the benefits or the need to change, or they don't think it's going to be effective? And resource, have they not got the capacity, tools and resources to engage with the change that's being asked of them? Okay, we'll move on to the second kind of idea of working with resistance to change, and that's around working with emotions. So organisational change can evoke a variety of emotional responses from individuals. Emotional reactions to change are often viewed as a burden, and you quite often get leaders say we don't want to deal with emotions, it's too complicated and messy, but they're actually a really important part of any change process. And how somebody feels about change is going to be really personal. Somebody might see it as a threat, another person as an opportunity. So working with emotions and acknowledging them is really important. And we know from research, and we'll signpost to the report, that the factor that makes the biggest difference between those leaders who deliver transformative change and those who don't is whether leaders embrace the emotional journey that their people need to go on in change. So there's research that proves that's really important. Okay, so understanding emotions is really important. How are they going to show up, when they might show up. One of the most commonly known and used models is the Kubler-Ross change curve. It was originally developed to show how people respond to bereavement. It's been adapted for change. And that process that says that people go through the stages of shock and denial, anger and blame, confusion, resignation, acceptance, problem solving, and commitment. The model's got its critics. A lot of people suggest it's overly simplistic, it's too linear, that people don't go through kind of the process in a straight line. They might get stuck at certain stages, move backwards and forwards, they might skip stages. So we wanted to share an alternative model. So Julie Hodges from Durham University writes, there's a really great book that we'll signpost you to. He writes about change. She's combined the Kubler-Ross change curve. Excellent. Garin's waving the book. And a William Bridges model that looks at transitions to show a more realistic view of how people go through change. And this model proposes 3 phases. So first up, it's reconciliation, the idea that people have to let go of current ways of working and behaving in order to engage in change. Then they're in a kind of reorientation phase where they're exploring new ways of working and behaving. And then they're in new beginnings, kind of recommitting to new ways of working and what's being changed. And then you can layer the Kubler-Ross stages on top of that. There you go. But you have to hold it lightly and recognize it's not linear or sequential, and people will move backwards and forwards between all of those. But it gives you quite a good set of language to think about how people might respond to change. But people will be at different points at different times and in different parts of the change process. There's another tool that we use called the emotional culture deck. So we use this with our clients, and it's a really simple, deceptively simple card-based tool that helps people have structured conversations about emotions at work. And it's especially useful when you're talking about change. So it helps groups and teams explore how they want and need to feel, both for themselves and for their people, for how they need to feel and not feel for change to be successful. It gives people a new language and new chance to talk openly and safely about emotions in a way that doesn't happen very often in the workplace. And then importantly, we work with them to identify the behaviours and actions that they need to take at an individual and a collective level to fully engage in change. So that's a really lovely tool as well, and you can learn more about that. And then lastly, the other thing with working with resistance to change is giving people anchors. So change is uncertain, and people want kind of things that they can cling on to while they're going through uncertainty. So we've got 3 anchors here that are worth thinking about. The first one's what's not changing. So when we talk about change, we often talk about what is changing. If you can talk to people about what's not changing, then that can really help people cope with the kind of anxiety. And the research has shown that people who get told, when you communicate change, if you tell people about what's going to stay constant, those people feel less doubtful about the change than those who didn't receive that assurance about what wasn't going to change. Anchoring people in past successes can be really valuable as well. So remind people, the organisation, the team, or even individuals, when they've successfully coped with a similar change can be powerful. Bringing in experienced people to lead or support the change as well, so you've got some kind of credibility that the change is feasible, is really good. And then lastly, if you can anchor people by creating a sense of familiarity and showing them how they can use their existing capabilities to implement the changes, then that's really valuable as well. Okay, so that's our 3 strategies for dealing with misdiagnosing resistance to change. The first one is reframing resistance, so see it as a positive and see it as data. The second one's working with emotions, and then the third one's provide anchors to give people something to ground themselves to. There's the resources, but you can follow those later.
Excellent. Thank you so much. There's loads of really meaty things to talk about there, Liz. Thank you so much to Camilla and to Mel for sort of sharing your tips and insights. So for everyone in the group, please feel free to share your tools, what you use as well. So I guess, Liz, based on what Dani's just shared there, have you experienced that sort of resistance to change in your work? And what strategies have you found to be most effective in working with that resistance?
Thanks a lot. And yeah, there's so much good stuff in there in what you said. And I think it's that it was a few years ago, I learned to stop using the word for myself, resistance, and just call it feedback. And I think as a practitioner, that can be so helpful when you're trying to make stuff happen by a certain time and all of that, just to think this is feedback. And as you've just said, it's data. I think the answer, again, it's similar to a lot of the other answers. It's about talking to people and putting yourself in their shoes, isn't it? And it sounds really simple, but I think it gets forgotten in change. And that information you just brought in, Dani, I was talking to a leader a while ago about a change they were working on, and saying, we need to allow some space for people to process what they're letting go of in Bridges' mind. And I'd come up with this sort of plan of how it would all run. And they did say, well, no, I don't think we should talk about how people feel about it. We just need to get on and do it. And I think that's a really common thing. So again, it's going back to asking questions and helping explore why that might not, helping them realise why not that might not be the best approach, and we did get there in the end. But I think if you understand what's going on for people, that's the starting point. It's having empathy. And I suppose another model that I would bring in, it's the SCARF model. Some of you might have heard of it, David Rock. So it's based in neuroscience about this idea of threat and reward. So as you've just spoken about, change can be perceived as a threat. And the way we respond to threats, neuroscience tells us that it's the same as the zebra facing the lion in the jungle. The same bodily reactions happen and all these stress hormones are released, and then we can't be creative and positive and contribute well. And when you think about the SCARF model is talking about status, knowing that I'm valued, certainty, knowing where I stand, autonomy, knowing I have a choice, relatedness, knowing where I belong, and fairness, that I'm being treated fairly. And when we start to talk to people about, we're going to change your job, it's going to look different, we're going to change the way we work around here, you're going to be going into a different team, all these kind of things, at least one or two or three of those, or even all of them, are affected. So I think talking to people is the answer, and getting to where they are. And an example, it's so easy to label people and put them in a box, like you just described before. And I can think of a change a while ago in an organisation, a different organisation I was working in, and it was really big. We were under a lot of pressure. It was all about saving money. There were timescales and deadlines, and we were doing all this stuff on business processes and bringing things together. And there was a really key leader involved who just was not playing their part. And he was obstructing everything, challenging back everything, but he was really, really critical to this change program in the work he was doing. And it was so much so that the senior team were talking about moving him out, and it was such a difficult decision, because if we move him out, then what are we going to do, because we need him, and all of that. And all it took was for someone to sit down and have a chat with him. That was all it was. And he eventually got involved. He became a change champion, and eventually he became a super advocate for the program, recruited other change champions, delivered what he was meant to deliver and more. And it was such a simple thing, just sitting and having a cup of coffee, so I know that's not a grand theory or anything like that, but I think this human side is so important.
Who knew it could be so simple? It's true though, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we've all got our own stories. I've had a very similar one where someone was resisting, and it turns out his colleagues had been made redundant in quite a brutal way previously, and he saw it as an insecurity to give up his response. He had to feel essential. So therefore, by just understanding those insecurities that people have, you can get them on board. Really rich examples. Thank you so much, Liz. Brilliant. So we're now on to the final mistake of the evening, and be ready with your questions for Liz or for Dani and I, or we really, there's so much experience in the room. We've loved the things that you're sharing. So please feel free just to share your insights and your experiences in the chat, and we'll come to them as well. So mistake number 4 is something that is overlooked in organizations, which is not paying attention to change readiness. So getting an organization ready for change is a critical but often overlooked part of managing change. How prepared your organization is and your people will be a huge contributing factor to the results of your change initiative. If they're not ready, trying to bring about the change is going to lead to chaos instead of progress. So just this afternoon, for example, for me, the COO, they've got a brand new COO in their organization. It's a big financial institute. He's been off for 3 months between jobs. He's all refreshed. He's got a mandate for change. He's come into the organization and everyone is exhausted. They've been flat out since COVID, and he's coming with a change agenda, and there's just no change readiness. So how do you do that? And that's something that really needs to be appreciated and respected. So change is inevitable for organizations. They need to adapt to keep up with external changes in the environment. and ensure their survival. But really sort of managing change requires skill. So depending on the situations, the leaders really need to decide, is it the right time for major change? Or should we focus on maybe smaller changes while we improve the organization's readiness? So, but sometimes you don't have a choice, like something is thrust upon us like COVID, where we all had to switch to remote overnight. It isn't optional. So the focus needs to be on doing every single thing we can possible to prepare organization and its people for the change. So this means building ability, capacity, resilience to handle and survive the change. So what does being ready for change actually look like in an organization? So the readiness change is probably quite a way of looking at it. So we talked about the ability, it's important to recognize and respect and address the readiness for it. And this actually avoids the chaos. So there's two aspects to consider: the readiness of the organization as a whole and the readiness of individuals within it. So if most individuals view the change as necessary and positive and trust the organization's ability to handle it, the change is more likely than not to go well. Individual readiness for change is marked by a more sort of proactive and positive attitude towards the change. And there's kind of sort of four elements to it. So number one is that they understand and support the need for change. So the case has been made, they understand the rationale and emotionally as well. They see the benefits, the change, and they see it as outweighing the potential downsides. And all changes have downsides, no matter how hard you try and sell it. The third one is that they have confidence in the organization's ability. So if it's constantly failed at implementing the same type of initiative over and over again, they won't have that confidence. And then the last one is a belief in their own ability, that they can actually step up and effectively participate and adapt to the change. And building on a point that Dani made, is that readiness for change will fluctuate throughout the change process. There'll be times when everyone's ready, and there's times where people might be in different places. So it's really important to keep that ongoing communication and dialogue going throughout to make sure that we're ready at different stages. So how can we work differently? So there's a really nice model that Julie Hodges came up with. We quoted her a few times tonight. That's because we've got her book here. We're not on any commission whatsoever, but it's a great reference. And we hopefully will have her as a speaker at one of our events coming up soon. And she talks about these different things. So the ghosts of changes past. And we all know that is the legacy and hangover of previous things. People's capability to change. The tolerance for risk in the organization. Is it too much? How much resilience people have? And are you really resourcing this change? Are you really giving people the ability to actually put their efforts into it? So a nice tool that we like to use is a pre-mortem. Again, we're just sharing you lots of tools that we use, and that gets people to actually think through the implications of the change and what might be the problems and roadblocks. So again, it kind of surfaces these things and helps people engage in the process. That works really well. The other thing about it is ensuring that the change readiness is there by looking at things like leadership commitment, which is critical to this. Leaders are often really busy. Let's be fair, there's a lot of demands on their time, and many leaders are often prone to shiny new thing syndrome. So they get all excited about the change and then something else comes along and they'll go into that. Or they are prone to things like the planning fallacy, where maybe they underestimate the amount of time and effort that's required. And so they get distracted and it loses momentum. And they maybe think that a single announcement in a town hall is enough. So then they move on to the next initiative. And this often leads to a loss in momentum. So it's really important, if you're part of a change team, to keep your senior leaders engaged and making sure it's staying right at the top of the agenda. If they're not prepared or committed to supporting the change, it will have a significant impact. So just there's some elements to think about. They need to give active and visible sponsorship. So sponsorship is one of those things that people aren't trained in, but there's a lot of skills that come with it to actually clear the ground and keep this moving as well. So make sure they're really aware what that does. And often you find that senior leaders will maybe sponsoring 2 or 3 different initiatives. Make sure they've got a realistic number on their plate. The second one is that they're role modeling the new behaviors, and that's an easy trap for people to fall into when it comes to change, and that will disrupt your change. Making sure that they're sustaining their energy and momentum, they're talking about it in all their conversations, they're checking in with people. The fourth thing is that there's just constant communication. It's always on the agenda. They're always asking about it, and that they're really allocating resource. They're allocating it up front and not after the case. And the priorities of the organization or the team reflect the change. It doesn't drop down as new things occur. The other part is the role that middle managers play in the process. And a nice quote, there are many changes that have crashed upon the rocks of middle management. And it's not that middle management are difficult, it's just that they're often, they're too busy, they're torn between different commitments, or they just don't have like enough resource to actually do it, or they don't understand the change. So it's really important that we actually engage them in the process. Ruben found that managers who are highly cynical about change convey that cynicism to their employees, and in turn their employees become cynical about it too. So it's making sure that middle managers are really clear in terms of how they feel about it, and they're involved early and often in the process. The next thing is about lessons of changes past. So it's really important that we recognize the fact that we have tried changes in the past, and we review them. What was the process that we followed? What's our track record at this? The last change initiatives that did, what were the outcomes and the outputs? Often these things aren't measured. Were they actually successfully implemented? What were the lessons learned? What mistakes have we acknowledged about that? And every single time we do a change, we sometimes have a bit of willful blindness and don't look at it, but there's so many lessons to be learned. And that honoring the past. So we often use the word transformation. And what we forget is that when we say something's a transformation, that's basically saying that what came before was a bit rubbish. So that doesn't build on all the effort that people have built in before, where they have been innovative and they have tried. So honor the previous efforts of people as well to get their commitment. We're now into capability and capacity. And this is, again, these are sort of learnings from change initiatives which are really important. So often you'll see changes which are announced, which is your role will be backfilled. And then it turns out that it's difficult to backfill the role, or it's never backfilled. And so the person being seconded to the change and has to do 2 jobs, or the people left behind are left with a difficult legacy about it. So it's making sure that that promise is followed through on. The next thing is to focus on well-being, because change is stressful. So it's making sure that the change deadlines and everything about it are realistic, and we're checking in on people's well-being. We're not going too fast. We haven't got too many work in progress going at any one time. The next thing is that we address uncertainty. So there's a lot of uncertainty around change. So we're doing everything as managers to make sure that we're clarifying and communicating what the next steps are, where there's any doubt around people's roles, where we're upfront if we can't tell people now, but we tell people when we can tell them. And also being aware of change fatigue. It's that example I shared earlier. Sometimes people have been through a lot of change, and what is it about this change, which is like the previous 2 changes, is going to make a difference? So it's really being aware of that, and that people may not have the energy now. So it's best to pick your times and making sure you don't launch those change initiatives at those pinch points during the year, and we manage that as well. Those are the 3 areas there. So leadership commitment, lessons of changes past, and capacity and capability. And then just the resource that we talked about, the Julie Hodges book. And Liz, you were nodding a few times in there. I'm sure there's a few things you disagreed with, but what's been your experience of assessing change readiness in your organisation?
Yeah, thank you. I was nodding because they all seem such sensible ideas, of course, vigorously agreeing with them. And I think when it really prompted me to question my practice and think about what I do when I was talking to Garin and Dani about this session, because in the real world, I'm not sure I can put my hand on heart and say that change readiness is really focused on and assessed. I think there's often, so I'm just being really honest here. I think there's often some kind of driver, or some leader's got an idea, or there's something that necessarily there's a perception it needs to be fixed and so on. And it all gets set up and off we go. And I think that, there is some really obvious data out there that could be used. So it's made me think about what I can do. What can I do differently? So it's really good. I've learned from this session quite a lot. Because most staff surveys, I think nowadays, include something like, I think this organisation manages change well. So there's some really basic things like that. And learning from changes past is so important. And, I work in an organisation that's literally hundreds of years old. And while it's got some really modern approaches in some things and it's adaptable, there are also some practices in that organisation, some of the rituals and the ceremonial stuff that you see that are literally hundreds of years old. So that there's this organisational push, well, we have seen it all before, and you feel like you're a butterfly flying through, and maybe you'll have a little impact. And but so I think it's harder in those contexts. But I don't know, I'm sure that, there might be some change management practitioners on the call who've got their change readiness assessment documents and all of those things, which I can think about occasions where we've worked with some of those, but they tend to be, okay, we've assessed it and we're going to do it anyway.
It's so true.
And so I suppose that then for us as practitioners, it's how do we work with that, and it's probably finding the moments, like in some of the other things that we've been talking about this evening, finding the opportunities to flag up how people are feeling and how they're going through the journey of change. Because I think the other thing, all these assessments happen at the start of the program and then they get forgotten. And you said it's dynamic, so that tolerance for ambiguity, I've seen groups where you'd say, well, the tolerance for ambiguity in this group or this area of the organisation is really high, but then once things start really getting close to the wire on the change, suddenly that can switch in an instant, and it's maybe because you haven't communicated well or supported them well, or it's just gone on for too long. Or some of those threats that we were talking about before, they can see other parts of the organisation and different things happening. Maybe it doesn't feel fair. And
yeah, that's really interesting. I guess one of the things is you when you get to the point where people press the go button, there's a lot of biases at play. Obviously, we always talk about the fact there's 186 different cognitive biases that afflict all of us day in, day out. And then you start to see things like confirmation bias coming in, which is, it doesn't matter what information are presented, because it is we've decided, I've envisaged this is going to happen, I've made commitments to my board, like who am I to turn back on this? So if you are sitting on information which is like, you know what, people aren't ready, it's a really difficult place to be, isn't it? And there's no perfect answer, is it? All you can do is kind of sort of feed the data in. I guess one of the things that we were sort of saying is that, you can gather data through obviously the questions that might be in your engagement survey. You can run focus groups and do one-to-ones. There are some great things. I think Julie Hodges in her book has a change readiness assessment. I've got a Jay Galbraith book on OD here. He has a great change readiness assessment as well. So it's a lot of it is looking at, do we have the capabilities and capacity even for this as well? So at least, even if the change has to happen, at least you've got a much stronger business case to make sure it's properly resourced, because a lot of changes are bootstrapped, aren't they?
And maybe taking that risk-based, you've reminded me of a scenario in a different organisation where not through any systematic approach like you're describing, I was able to influence a situation where we weren't ready for this.
I think you've just got the attention of about 70 people on the line now. So this is good.
But I think it was really hard, because I think, as you were saying, a leader's made a commitment to the exec group that this is going to be delivered, and there's some implication for the organisation around it. And so they've got to go back and say, actually, I'm not going to do this. So that's where the personal support to the leader, I think, is really important, and a risk-based approach. So looking at, well, what are let's look at some of the risks of going ahead now, what might happen. And it depends, doesn't it, on the type of organisation it is. So if it's an organisation that's quite risk averse and talks about risks in a real way, then that works there. But there's some organisations that have all these risk logs, but they don't really, they're not really like real. So then you'd need to find something different. So I suppose it's speaking the language of the organisation, finding what influences that person, but also providing, again, as partnering with leaders, I think, to help them process some of this stuff, because they're in quite a lonely place when in that sort of situation.
I think it's being able to use their language, isn't it, and articulate the consequences in the context of what the organisation is trying to achieve, not being seen as I'm being a blocker, I'm being difficult. It's like, if we don't address change readiness, or we're aware these are challenges, if we don't address them, it's going to impact on our ability to do what we want to do and need to do. It's how you phrase it. So it's the right language, isn't it?
One of the things that we often use as well is we get people to talk in terms of probability. So because people often treat change as selling the idea, storytelling and all that kind of thing. And if you can actually introduce the idea of probability, because things are never 100%. So if you can sort of play in the factors, we don't have enough resource, or there's a capability gap there, then if you actually get to get your senior leaders talk in terms of probability, there's an 80% chance that this will work. That often leads to a much more informed conversation. So what does that 20% risk look like, and what are those factors, and what can we do to mitigate it? And often it just means a much more extensive conversation. And that's probably part of what we talk like dialogic OD. So it's like having an opportunity so it's action through dialogue. Things are moving forward as well. Again, there's a lot of comments coming through, which is people sort of saying, sometimes we have to change. Like, even if you do make the change, they'll just go ahead anyway. So it is a real kind of lived issue. And Mel has said that working in government, we don't often have the chance for change readiness. Often we're working for politicians that who rely on rubbishing the past to justify the approach. Liz, anything to say about that?
And that's it, isn't it? But even in organisations that haven't got that context, I think you get new leaders come in and they just want to demonstrate that they've got, they've been recruited for the right reason. They can change the place, and what went before, that wasn't great. So I think that I really recognise that, and I think it applies in lots of contexts.
Wonderful. Courtney's just come up with a great idea here from his practice or her practice, including change-related elements in a go, no-go criteria. So up front, this is what go and no-go looks like. And that helps to elevate change readiness as a necessity for initiating a change. It's always like, if this, then that. If this is in place, then we can go. If that doesn't work, then we can't go. That's a great way. And again, it's another way of having a really informed conversation about what are the conditions that are going to increase the probability of this change succeeding as well. Wonderful. I'm loving the wisdom of the group this evening, and we've got some great book references in there as well. So we're just coming up for 25 past. If anybody's got any questions, then you're really welcome to ask them in the chat. We're just going to take you through just what next here.
So just a very quick recap on those 4 mistakes that lead to chaotic change. So the first one was creating the illusion of certainty where it doesn't exist. The second was not involving people early and often. The third was misdiagnosing resistance to change, and the fourth was not paying attention to change readiness. So we said at the outset we wanted to prompt and provoke your thinking and get you to think differently about change. So if you've got questions, pop them in chat, but we'd also love you to kind of share in chat one insight that you're going to take away from this session, something that's occurred to you or sparked a thought in you, and one action that you might take to deal with change in a different way.
Brilliant.
So we'd love to hear those in chat or any questions you've got.
Absolutely. We love these CIPD sessions to have something you can actually take away and is tangible as well. So please feel free, one insight as well. I guess for me, one of the insights sort of taken away, it's just really reinforced the power of making time for talk. It just seems counterintuitive sometimes to slow down, to speed up, but that's such an important thing, isn't it? So we've got that. So Liz, you're taking away the change readiness, which is really good. Okay, great. So just give it a couple moments, and then what we'll do. So if you want to contact us, Liz, if anyone's got any questions, are they welcome to get in contact with you via LinkedIn or that as well?
Yes, yeah.
Debbie shared, I like the idea of providing anchors to build confidence. So almost like what's in scope, what's out of scope. Brilliant, that's great. Courtney loved Liz's point of including development opportunities as a hook and the benefit for change champions as well. Excellent. Thank you so much, June. Being a brick, not a cathedral, from Rosemary. And June, hi June, is taking away her perspective on resistance to change, kind of sort of challenging that myth. And can we all just officially announce the 70% of change initiatives fail is dead? No one on this call will ever tell anyone about it. It's not true.
It's false.
That's brilliant. Guys, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone this evening. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the call this evening. We've really enjoyed having you on the call this evening. Please stay in touch, and we will be running more organisation development and design events next year. So please keep tuned onto Eventbrite as well. And yeah, we'll see you when the new year begins. And thank you so much to Liz for all your time and preparation and skill in putting those questions together and sharing your experiences. You've done it all for free, and we're very appreciative as well. And again, it always impresses me how much the HR community gives up its personal time for its personal development. So thank you to everyone who's joined us on the call tonight and all your wonderful suggestions as well. So thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.